The growing intensity of extreme events driven by climate change and sea level rise poses urgent challenges for coastal cities. These coastal hazards have the capacity to inflict substantial damage on coastal communities. Coastal cities face unique risks because of physical hazards, population, and economic concentration. This combination makes coastal urban areas some of the most climate-sensitive locations on Earth, requiring adaptive, forward-looking planning. People are more aware than ever that our environment is changing. The aim of the course is to identify the major uncertainties shaping coastal urban futures. Understand interactions among climate, socio-economic, ecological, and governance drivers. Explore planning and design strategies for managing risk, change, and deep uncertainty. Recognize the role of adaptive governance and iterative decision-making. Coastal cities face unique risks because physical hazards, population pressures, and infrastructure vulnerabilities overlap in ways not seen elsewhere. Accelerating sea level rise, more frequent storm surges, shoreline erosion, and increasing salinization all threaten land stability, freshwater availability, and the functioning of natural protective systems. These hazards interact with dense settlement patterns. Coastal zones host rapidly growing populations and a high concentration of economic assets, including ports, industrial districts, and tourism infrastructure. As a result, even moderate climate-driven disturbances can trigger disproportionately large financial losses and service disruptions. At the same time, ecosystems such as wetlands, dunes, mangroves, and coral reefs, historically vital for buffering hazards, are being degraded, reducing their ability to protect urban areas. Critical infrastructure in coastal cities further amplifies risk. Power plants, wastewater networks, transportation hubs, and communication systems are often located in low-lying zones that are increasingly exposed to flooding, groundwater rise, and saltwater corrosion. Because these infrastructures are interdependent, failures can cascade rapidly, turning localized disruptions into widespread outages. Combined with governance challenges, uneven adaptive capacity, and socio-economic vulnerabilities in at-risk communities, these structural conditions make coastal cities especially sensitive to climate shocks. Addressing these risks requires flexible, long-term, and transformative adaptation strategies. Key uncertainty drivers for coastal urban futures arise from the complex interplay between climate dynamics, population change, and governance capacity. Climate trajectories remain highly uncertain due to diverging emissions pathways and nonlinear Earth system responses, particularly regarding ice sheet melt and long-term sea level rise. This uncertainty extends to the frequency and intensity of extreme events, such as storm surges, compound flooding, and heat waves, which are projected to intensify but vary widely across scenarios. Emerging hazards like groundwater rise and cascading multi-hazard interactions further complicate risk assessments. Demographic and migration patterns add another layer of unpredictability. Climate-driven displacement from low-elevation coastal zones may increase, yet many coastal cities continue to grow due to economic opportunities, tourism, and urbanization pressures. Shifting age structures, informal settlements, and socio-economic inequalities influence vulnerability levels and adaptive capacity in ways that are difficult to forecast. Governance capacity and access to adaptation finance represent critical uncertainties shaping long-term outcomes. Institutional fragmentation, inconsistent regulatory enforcement, and fluctuating political will often delay or constrain adaptive responses. At the same time, global adaptation finance remains insufficient and unpredictable, limiting cities' ability to invest in resilient infrastructure or transformational strategies. Together, these drivers create deeply uncertain futures that require flexible, multi-pathway planning approaches. Coastal cities face escalating physical and environmental stressors driven by climate change and human alterations of coastal systems. Accelerated sea level rise is one of the most significant threats, with projections diverging widely across climate scenarios. High emission pathways indicate a substantially faster rise due to intensified ice sheet melt and thermal expansion, increasing the likelihood of chronic coastal flooding and permanent inundation. These risks are compounded by land subsidence, which in many deltas and urbanized coastlines exceeds the pace of global sea level rise. Subsidence from groundwater extraction, sediment compaction, and development lowers land elevation, magnifying relative sea level rise and accelerating the frequency of high tide flooding. Shoreline instability and erosion further weaken the natural defenses of coastal zones. Changes in sediment supply, stronger storm surges, and rising seas contribute to the retreat of beaches and wetlands, undermining infrastructure and reducing ecosystem resilience. At the same time, saltwater intrusion threatens freshwater availability and agricultural productivity. As seawater penetrates coastal aquifers and soils, drinking water becomes salinized, drainage systems degrade, and farmlands lose fertility. These interacting stressors place coastal cities under increasing environmental pressure and demand adaptive long-term planning. Climate change is intensifying the frequency and severity of extreme weather events in coastal cities, creating complex and compound risks. Extreme rainfall events are becoming more frequent and intense, often co-occurring with storm surges and high river discharge. These river-coastal compound flooding events overwhelm drainage systems and cause widespread urban inundation, as highlighted in multi-hazard assessments of European and global coastal regions. At the same time, tropical cyclones are intensifying, producing stronger winds, higher storm surges, and greater rainfall volumes. These changes amplify coastal flooding and erosion risks, especially in low-lying urban deltas. Coastal regions also face increasing heat waves, which pose severe dangers to public health, electricity demand, and urban livability. Heat stress disproportionately affects vulnerable populations and alters seasonal tourism flows. Finally, critical coastal ecosystems, including mangroves, wetlands, and coral reefs, are being disrupted by warming waters, acidification, and extreme events. These ecosystems provide essential natural protection, and their decline reduces shoreline stability and increases urban exposure to hazards. Socioeconomic uncertainties strongly influence the future vulnerability of coastal cities, particularly through shifting migration patterns and uneven demographic change. Climate-related displacement is expected to increase as sea level rise, compound flooding, and erosion undermine housing, infrastructure, and livelihoods in low-elevation coastal zones. Yet, many coastal cities may simultaneously continue to grow due to economic opportunity, tourism attractiveness, and established migration flows, creating unpredictable patterns of urban expansion. Demographic shifts add further complexity. Aging populations increase demand for social and health services, while informal settlements, often located in high-risk zones, expand exposure and reduce adaptive capacity. Uneven socio-economic resilience and recovery capacity magnify disparities in how communities respond to climate shocks. Lower-income groups, migrant households, and precarious workers face greater barriers to adaptation and slower recovery after extreme events. Coastal economies dependent on tourism are particularly vulnerable, as heat waves, storms, and declining environmental quality disrupt visitor flows and revenue stability. Climate-sensitive sectors such as beach tourism, waterfront recreation, and seasonal employment face increasing volatility due to temperature extremes and pollution events. Together, these factors generate deep socio-economic uncertainty that shapes exposure, risk distribution, and the effectiveness of future adaptation strategies. Governance and institutional capacity play a critical role in shaping coastal cities' ability to adapt to accelerating climate risks, yet they are also significant sources of uncertainty. Adaptation capacity varies widely between national and local governments, with some cities demonstrating strong technical capability and long-term planning. In contrast, others struggle with limited resources, insufficient expertise, or weak institutional structures. This uneven capacity affects the timing, scale, and effectiveness of adaptation measures. Global climate finance flows are similarly unpredictable. Many coastal cities depend on external funding to implement major adaptation projects, such as flood defenses, nature-based solutions, or resilient infrastructure, but access to finance is inconsistent and often delayed. This constrains long-term planning and leaves high-risk areas increasingly exposed. Regulatory inconsistency, weak land use enforcement, and outdated zoning practices further exacerbate exposure by allowing continued development in hazardous coastal zones. Political will and institutional fragmentation frequently lead to decision paralysis, where competing priorities or short-term political cycles delay adaptation actions even when risks are well understood. Together, these uncertainties undermine coordinated coastal resilience efforts and widen vulnerability gaps across communities. Technological and infrastructure-related uncertainties significantly shape the resilience of coastal cities. The pace of innovation in resilient infrastructure, such as adaptive flood barriers, nature-based coastal defenses, and climate-resilient water systems, remains highly uncertain. Many cities rely on aging coastal protection structures that were not designed for accelerating sea level rise, compounding flood risks and raising questions about long-term reliability. Adoption of smart sensing and early warning technologies is expanding, but implementation varies widely due to financial constraints, technical capacity, and governance challenges. Some cities, such as Dublin and Gdańsk, are integrating real-time monitoring systems for water quality and flood prediction. Yet, many others lack the resources to deploy and maintain such tools. Infrastructure interdependencies, linking power, transport, water, and telecommunications, create additional uncertainty. Failures in one system can cascade rapidly, disabling pumps, shutting down transport, or disrupting emergency response. These interconnected vulnerabilities amplify the consequences of extreme weather events and make future infrastructure performance difficult to predict. Coastal ecosystems, including wetlands, mangroves, coral reefs, and coastal forests, possess important adaptive capacities but are increasingly stressed by climate change and human pressures. Wetlands and mangroves can adjust to sea level rise through sediment accumulation and root elevation. Yet, their resilience depends on sufficient sediment supply and space to migrate landward, conditions often constrained by coastal development. Ecosystems face thresholds and tipping points, where gradual environmental change can trigger rapid collapse, such as mass coral bleaching events or mangrove dieback during extreme heat, salinity intrusion, or prolonged inundation. Altered sediment flows, driven by erosion, river damming, and land subsidence, reshape delta morphology, accelerating channel instability and wetland loss. Reef degradation reduces wave attenuation, increasing shoreline erosion and storm surge impacts. These ecological declines contribute to the loss of critical ecosystem services, including coastal protection, carbon storage, fisheries productivity, and water filtration. As natural buffers weaken, coastal cities become increasingly exposed to flooding, contamination, and long-term land loss. Future coastal urban risk is shaped by interacting uncertainties across climate, socio-economic, governance, and ecological systems. Climate trajectories under RCP, SSP scenarios diverge widely, producing different magnitudes of sea level rise, extreme rainfall, and storm intensity. RCP-SSP combinations link climate futures with socio-economic futures to create coherent scenarios for evaluating global and regional risks, including those in coastal cities. Demographic and economic changes, including urban growth in low-elevation zones, climate-driven migration, and shifting tourism flows, affect exposure patterns in unpredictable ways. Governance capacity and financial resources vary significantly among cities, influencing adaptation timing, infrastructure investment, and policy consistency. Ecological systems face thresholds and tipping points. Degradation of wetlands, deltas, reefs, and mangroves reduces natural protection and accelerates hazard impacts. Crucially, these drivers interact non-linearly. Climate stress amplifies ecological degradation, economic disruption limits adaptation funding, and governance gaps compound other risks, creating cascading, uncertain futures for coastal cities. Coastal cities rely on a suite of planning and analytical tools to navigate deep uncertainty across climate, socio-economic, and ecological systems. Scenario planning enables exploration of multiple plausible futures, such as differing RCP-SSP pathways, to stress test policies under a wide range of conditions. Adaptive pathways and dynamic planning build flexibility into decision-making by identifying trigger points, alternative adaptation routes, and transformation options, as emphasized in adaptation pathways frameworks. Resilience metrics and stress testing help evaluate the robustness of infrastructure, ecosystems, and governance systems under extreme or unexpected events. Multi-hazard and compound risk assessments capture interactions among storms, rainfall, sea level rise, and contamination, improving understanding of cascading failures in urban systems. Early warning systems and smart monitoring enhance preparedness, while insurance mechanisms, including parametric insurance and catastrophe bonds, offer financial protection and incentivize risk reduction. Finally, multi-level planning, linking local, national, and international governance, supports coordinated adaptation, improved access to financing, and long-term strategic alignment. Scenario planning enables coastal cities to navigate deep uncertainty by examining multiple plausible futures rather than relying on single predictions. By comparing high-emission and low-emission climate trajectories, such as RCP-SSP combinations, cities can understand how different warming levels, socio-economic trends, and governance futures shape exposure to sea level rise, storms, heat, and ecological degradation. Instead of fixed master plans, scenario planning supports flexible and adaptive strategies that can evolve as new information emerges. This approach integrates social, economic, and environmental uncertainties, acknowledging that demographic change, migration, land use pressures, and ecosystem decline interact with climate hazards. Scenario planning also helps cities stress test infrastructure and development pathways under extreme but plausible conditions, revealing vulnerabilities and guiding resilient investment decisions. Through structured exploration of future uncertainty, coastal cities can prioritize no-regret measures, identify tipping points requiring adaptation, and build long-term strategies that remain robust across a wide range of possible futures. Adaptive pathways and dynamic planning provide a structured approach for decision-making under deep uncertainty by allowing strategies to evolve as conditions change. Central to this framework are trigger points, measurable indicators such as flood thresholds, erosion rates, infrastructure failure, or availability of funding, that signal when current policies are no longer effective and must transition to alternative actions. This enables options-based planning, where multiple pathways are kept open to preserve long-term flexibility and avoid lock-in to maladaptive choices. Dynamic planning also considers transformational pathways, such as strategic relocation, major land use change, or redesigning critical infrastructure when incremental adjustments are insufficient. Tools such as dynamic adaptive policy pathways, DAP, and robust decision-making, RDM, help evaluate a wide range of futures, identify vulnerabilities, and test how strategies perform across uncertain scenarios. These methods support resilient long-term planning by combining scenario analysis, monitoring, and flexible adaptation strategies that can shift as new information emerges. Coastal cities increasingly rely on a mix of physical and hybrid infrastructure to manage rising flood risk and shoreline instability. Traditional engineered structures, such as elevated roads, seawalls, flood barriers, storm surge gates, and raised critical facilities, provide predictable and immediate protection but face performance uncertainties as sea level rise accelerates and extreme events intensify. Nature-based solutions, including mangrove restoration, dune systems, wetlands, and coral or oyster reefs, help attenuate waves, stabilize shorelines, and deliver co-benefits such as habitat creation and carbon storage. However, their effectiveness depends on sediment supply, ecological health, and space for inland migration. To address limitations of both approaches, many cities adopt hybrid green-gray systems, combining ecological buffers with engineered reinforcement to improve robustness. Under deep uncertainty, infrastructure performance must be evaluated across multiple climate trajectories, using adaptive design, stress testing, and pathway planning to ensure systems remain functional as conditions evolve. This integrated approach reduces long-term risk while maintaining flexibility for future upgrades. Coastal cities must adopt a combination of monitoring technologies, upgraded infrastructure, green solutions, and strong governance frameworks to address the growing contamination risks intensified by climate change. Real-time monitoring systems, such as water quality sensors in Dublin and marine monitoring programs in Gdańsk, help detect pollution during extreme weather but require substantial investment, technical expertise, and long-term institutional support. Nature-based strategies and sustainable urban drainage systems, implemented in cities like Orzaldea and Aras, reduce flood impacts and filter contaminants while enhancing biodiversity, though their scalability is limited by land use constraints, maintenance needs, and public awareness. At the same time, many cities with aging wastewater infrastructure, such as Samsun and Benidorm, must invest heavily in resilient systems capable of handling increased rainfall, stormwater volumes, and drought-related contamination. Wetland and dune restoration projects in Pirin and Massa further demonstrate how natural buffers can protect coastlines and improve water quality, though these solutions face political and economic challenges. Ultimately, effective governance, cross-sector collaboration, and community engagement, supported by participatory tools such as Coastal City Living Labs, are essential to ensuring that adaptation strategies are equitable, sustainable, and capable of meeting future climate challenges. Effective coastal adaptation depends on strong governance systems and meaningful community engagement. Participatory planning ensures that adaptation pathways reflect local priorities, indigenous knowledge, and social equity considerations, improving legitimacy and long-term acceptance. Inclusive decision processes also help identify context-specific triggers, vulnerabilities, and opportunities that top-down planning may overlook. Multi-level governance coordination, linking local, regional, and national institutions, is essential for aligning policies, funding streams, and regulatory frameworks, especially in coastal zones where hazards and responsibilities overlap. Building local capacity empowers communities to design and implement resilience projects such as nature-based solutions, flood preparedness initiatives, and monitoring programs. These community-led efforts strengthen social cohesion and improve adaptive capacity. Transparency, open data sharing, and adaptive institutions further enhance governance by enabling evidence-based decisions, iterative learning, and accountability across sectors. Together, these elements create governance systems capable of navigating uncertainty while fostering community-driven resilience. Climate-resilient investment frameworks guide coastal cities in prioritizing funding toward infrastructure and adaptation options that remain effective under uncertain future conditions. These frameworks incorporate stress testing, cost-benefit analysis, and adaptive pathways to ensure investments can evolve as climate risks intensify. Insurance innovations, including parametric insurance that pays out when predefined hazard thresholds are reached, and catastrophe bonds that transfer risk to capital markets, offer new mechanisms for rapid recovery and financial risk reduction. Public-private partnerships, PPPs, increasingly play a central role in mobilizing resources for large-scale coastal protection, hybrid infrastructure, and resilience projects, combining public oversight with private sector investment and technical expertise. Despite these advances, barriers to accessing global adaptation finance persist. Many coastal cities lack the administrative capacity, creditworthiness, or detailed climate risk data required to qualify for international climate funds. Fragmented governance, limited co-financing, and competition for scarce resources further constrain cities' ability to secure long-term, resilience-focused financing. Coastal urban futures unfold under deep uncertainty, but as emphasized in the lecture text, uncertainty is not a barrier, it is a fundamental design condition. Instead of seeking perfect predictions, planners must embrace uncertainty as the basis for adaptive, flexible, and learning-oriented approaches to coastal governance. Because climate, socio-economic, ecological, and governance systems interact in complex and often nonlinear ways, rigid long-term plans quickly become obsolete. Designing for uncertainty therefore means preparing for multiple plausible futures, continuously monitoring change, and updating strategies as new information emerges. Flexible and inclusive strategies are central to this process. Participatory governance, where communities, stakeholders, and institutions co-produce knowledge and decisions, ensures that adaptation pathways reflect diverse values, local priorities, and evolving risk perceptions. Such inclusive processes strengthen legitimacy, build trust, and expand adaptive capacity. At the governance level, flexibility involves iterative decision-making, cross-sector coordination, and the use of adaptive tools such as scenarios and pathways. Ultimately, coastal cities must plan for transformation, not only defense. While protective structures remain important, long-term resilience may require transformational actions such as strategic retreat, land use conversion, ecological restoration, and reconfiguration of critical infrastructure. Transformation acknowledges that some areas may become untenable under future sea level rise and extreme events. By reframing adaptation as an evolving, learning-based process rather than a fixed end state, cities can better navigate uncertainty and build futures that remain viable under a wide range of climate trajectories.